Nursery 5.
Okay.
8. have to tell you all from a personal perspective, I'm not a people person per se, so this is a lot more comfortable for me because I get to see you all and talk to you, but I don't have to be out, you know? So this is kind of right up my alley. Of course, I wish it wasn't happening because there's like this awful pandemic going on outside.
Yeah. It would be good if it were just because, right?
If it was a matter of choice, then, you know.
So Belinda, you're in your office. This is where you usually work now. Is that right?
My sun porch has become my office.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, so I just took it over. I mean, I have an office, a room in the house, but this has more room, more light. You know,
I get it.
The dogs can hang out here with me.
We need to all take a snapshot and then submit it to Roomerator and see what happens.
What's that?
Roomerator? It's on Twitter, and it started out as a joke. They, you know, when the pandemic started and everything went virtual, they started rating everybody's sort of background and decor. And it started as a joke, but it has become a pretty sort of serious competition among people on who can raise their score and who's going to get the better score on Roomerator.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm ready for that.
Sometimes.
Hey, Ann.
Hey, Trina. Good to see you all.
Yeah, you too. You're not there by yourself, are you, Ann?
No, no. Sally's here.
Sally's over there, but she's logging in on her own computer, I see.
I want to be Sally when I grow up.
Good to go. We're streaming live.
I think we're good to go. We're streaming live on YouTube, and we've got Ann here.
Okay.
All right, Steve or Dr. Wilkerson.
Susan.
Yeah.
I think Sally's just saying, whoever's kicking off, you can.
Okay. I was wondering, am I supposed to be doing something?
Steve, please take over. I'm off to the side in this room, so I'm going to be off camera.
Okay. Is that okay, Dr. Wilkerson? You ready for me to start?
I am ready for you to start. We're good to go.
All right, very good. Well, hello to everyone. My name is Steve Strauss, and I am with Developmental Associates. We're a company that's located in Durham. We're kind of Durham and Chapel Hill. And I want to talk with you a little bit about our process, but most importantly tonight, I want to ask you some questions with respect to the next Cumberland County Library Director. And your input is, my partner is supposed to be here in the meeting. Okay. If you all can hold just 1 minute, my partner in this process, Susan Brown, is struggling to get in now too. I guess she was with you all, Sally, is that right?
Yeah, so we were somehow in a different room or something, but I think Sally just go help Susan get in.
Oh, you did? Okay, great.
Sally just went to go take care of that.
Okay. Let me just let her know to check her email. Okay. All right. Sorry for that. So Susan will be working with me, and I'll have her introduce herself in just a minute. Let me just explain a little bit about our process. So give you just kind of an overview. We don't run a traditional search process. We use an approach that we call talent identification, and it focuses primarily on trying to give the decision makers. We're not the decision makers in this process. Ultimately, the county is. But we try to give the county the best information to make its decision. And so the way we do that is we get input from key stakeholders, you all being a very important piece of that. We've already gotten input from the county managers. We've gotten input from the public. We've gotten input from library staff. This morning I met with the administrative team and the other top leaders in the organization. Got their input as well. And you all will cap off our input efforts. Based on what we learned this week, we will be putting together a job ad and begin our recruitment process. There she is, just in time. We've had cross links with regard to who's going to meetings. Can you hear us okay, Susan?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was in a different meeting with some other people.
Yeah. We were in different virtual worlds for a while. Yeah. So I'm just explaining our process. So Susan, why don't you introduce yourself, and I'm going to start talking about you. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, everybody. I'm so glad to be with you tonight. My name is Susan Brown. I have been the director of the Chapel Hill Public Library for about 7 years now. I've been in the library business for 25 years. And I was hired through a process with Steve and Heather and their team. So I understand and am a believer in the process they use. And I'm also aware through the North Carolina Public Library Directors Group of the reputation of excellence of Cumberland County Public Library. So I am thrilled to be helping you all find your next great leader.
Great. So Susan, and she mentioned Heather Lee on our staff, also Holly Danford on our staff. All of us will be working together in this process. As I mentioned, we'll put together the job ad. We'll send it back to Sally and the management team for their input, and hopefully we can get that resolved no later than Monday of next week. Then we'll begin our recruitment process, and we'll recruit for, there's always a little bit of a problem recruiting over the holidays. So we're adding a few extra days into January. We'll recruit until about January the 10th. We'll use 4 different methods to recruit. Most importantly, Susan will reach out to folks that she thinks would be good candidates for the position. So that's what we call targeted recruitment. We'll also obviously post the job ad on key professional websites. We'll use put the information out on some listservs. We'll use social media as well. The candidates will apply. We will have a link on our system where they can come in and apply for the position. So we actually will get an application from them as well as a cover letter and a resume. We then go through all that information, and on January the 13th, we're going to have a meeting with the County Manager Steering Committee, and we'll share a couple of days ahead of time so they have an opportunity to review it. The information about all the candidates, what we've learned about each one of them, and also we'll do a Google search on all the candidates in case there's any information out there in the public domain. when we have that meeting, we will ask the steering committee to reduce the number of candidates down to no more than 15. Those folks will then, those top 15 candidates will then go through a rigorous, structured interview with Susan. She will ask all the candidates the same questions, use a rating scale that's predetermined as well to give us objective, consistent feedback. Invariably, at that point in the process, there are always individual questions for candidates. You didn't explain why you left this position. Why were you in this position for a short period of time? So on and so forth. We'll make sure that during that initial screening meeting, we're identifying any of those questions about the candidates. Susan will ask those as well. And then we will also have all the candidates answer some short essay questions. And we will also have them take a psychological called the emotional intelligence inventory that looks at key competencies that all of us would be interested in for a candidate, really for any position. How committed are they to their work? Are they someone who reaches out and engages and likes to engage with people? Are they do they systematically think through problems? Can they handle conflicts okay? Are they approachable? Are they an optimistic kind of person when they're dealing with challenging situations? Can they tolerate stress? So we'll be assessing all those competencies as well. Once again, we'll put all, by the way, we'll have a different person on our team. So those are 3 methods: an interview, psychological, and those essay questions. Different person on our team will administer each one. Susan will do the interview. Heather will do the essay questions, and Holly will manage Holly Danford on our team will manage the information from the emotional intelligence inventory. We'll then meet again on January 27 with the County Manager Steering Committee again and share the results of what we've learned from those methods. And at the end of that session, and by the way, I'd like to brag that I think that typically we've learned more about the candidates at that point than most organizations do before they hire the person. But the county will have reduced the number of candidates down to no more than 5. Those folks will then go through what's called an assessment center, and we can do this virtually. And it's scheduled for February 11 and 12. And what will happen during the way we think about that is an interview is an important part of any process. We will have already conducted an interview with a subject matter expert in Susan, so the candidates have already been through that. We are also confident that the final candidate or 2 will also meet with the counties and the steering committee and go through final interviews. But what we don't believe in, which is what most organizations do, is all we use to assess the candidates are interviews. We think that we need to do more than that to really get a deeper read on the candidate's skills for the job. If you think about it, what you can learn from an interview really are just 3 things. They're important, but they're just 3 competencies, and there are many competencies required to be an effective library director for a large organization like Cumberland County. In an interview, obviously you can observe their oral communication skills. You can hear their command of the English language. You can find out what they know. You can ask them questions that tap into their knowledge. And you can assess their judgment if you use what are called behaviorally based questions, which are best practice in interviews. And those are situational questions, such as you have a branch manager who reports to you. They're having some issues with their performance, How would you go about dealing with him or her to resolve those issues? When they answer that questions, what you get is what they say they would do. You do not see how they actually act. And that's the weakness of interviews. And so what we do is we actually try to set up exercises that simulate what the library director does in Cumberland County. I can't tell you exactly what those would be at this point because we haven't met with you all and gotten your input. But I will tell you that very typically when we're running an executive process, we have exercises that we actually tailor specifically to the county library director's position. But generally, they are exercises like running a staff meeting, making a public presentation, a coaching role play where they're actually dealing with someone acting as a staff member, putting together a plan of action to carry out some sort of initiative in written form. So those are the kinds of exercises we generally tend to design. We've done other things too, like mock press conferences and so forth. We do a variety of things, but again, we tailor it to what the county, what the position and what the county needs. And then we would bring in, actually we don't bring in, I'm using old terminology. We would recruit assessors. Nobody has to come in. All they have to do is get on a computer to participate in the process. And we haven't finalized who those folks would be at this point, but predominantly what we would want is other library directors or county assistant managers or managers who would assess the candidates. If we have 4 exercises like I described, like a coaching role play, like a staff meeting, like a presentation, like a written exercise, we typically have 3 to 4 assessors per exercise. And we train them for half a day before they see any candidates. And a key part of that is how to rate the candidates objectively and consistently, which again is a big challenge because most of us get very subjective and opinionated when it comes to evaluating candidates. But we give them very specific criteria to look for in our rating process. And we teach them on how to use those objectively. And then for the next half day and then the day following, we would run the candidates again up to 5 through those exercises, wrapping up mid-afternoon on day 2. And then we orchestrate a debrief where we simply facilitate and the assessor teams provide feedback to the team about each of the candidates and help the team process that information. Again, our job is to give them the information. Their job is to make the decisions about where the candidates stand at that point in the process. Very typically, we've had both experiences with the county. We've gone through a process where it was very clear they had one really excellent candidate and they went after that candidate. There was they interviewed her, but they focused on that one person who was really a superstar. We've also had some situations where there were 2 or 3 candidates that the county was interviewing after the process is over. We're confident that the county doesn't have to worry about the skills of the candidate when they conduct those final interviews. What they need to be more focused on is fit, because their skills have been assessed ad nauseum at that point. So, and at that point, the county makes a decision, makes a conditional job offer, then there's a background investigation. And then last of all, by the way, we provide coaching to the successful candidate. And we have learned a lot about them through the psychological testing, through their participation in these assessment exercises. And we want them to be successful. We want them to hit the ground running. So we provide them with that opportunity as well. So that's our process, essentially. Don't know if any of you all have any questions about that for Susan or for I. Any questions? Susan, you might want to just talk a little bit about your thoughts about the recruitment potential for this position as well. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, well, 2 things I'll say. One, having gone through this process, actually twice. I have a secondary role for the town of Chapel Hill. I also serve as the director for community arts and culture. And so I went through a process like that for that position as well. The emotional intelligence instrument that Heather does was brand new to me. And I continue to sort of reach back to what I learned from it. And I'm glad that Steve mentioned the coaching that they provide, because I was, for a couple of reasons, I was about a year into my term when I got my sort of follow-up coaching session with Heather, and she really delved into that. And it was everything that I was struggling with in my first year mapped directly to that EIQ or EQI. I forget what the acronym is. So that's a really powerful instrument. that resonates with me still 7 years later. And as far as the recruitment, I'm well connected and involved with the North Carolina Library Network with a sort of small cadre of public libraries in the Southeast and nationally. So every time that I've had conversations with Sally and with you all tonight, I have kind of a running list of both people that I've thought of, but also organizations to tap into and to reach out to. So once I have really refined what you are looking for, and I'm starting to get a pretty good sense, I can start to really map that to my network of both people and groups.
Great. All right. Any questions for Susan or I?
I have, as always, I'm sorry, Katrina, do you want to go first?
No, go Irene. Go ahead.
Okay. I always have questions. I have two at this point. Cumberland County is an extremely diverse community. I mean, both in terms of race and ethnicity, but also socioeconomic circumstances and everything else you can imagine. How do you guys sort of factor that into your search?
You want to jump in, Susan? Or you want me to start?
I'll start. Sure. I think that that's really baked in. I mean, having gone through this process and having helped Steve and Heather out on some other things, that's really going to be baked in from the start. So we've heard that from the first conversations with Sally and others. We're hearing it from you now. I'm sure Steve heard it from staff in his session with them. So that's going to be, I'm sure, going to show up in the job ad. It's going to show up in the interviews that I do. It'll show up in the assessment center. And I think it's in part what this process is so valuable for is it translates that into what does that look like for a leader. So it's one thing to know that the county is diverse, and our job is to design questions and exercises that get at leadership skills that it takes to lead that diverse community.
Okay, and my next question, the library director, sometimes has to walk quite a fine line between county management and their employees. You know, they're kind of the middleman between county management and the staff at the library. And that is, you know, there has to be somebody who can walk that fine line with executing what county management wants and selling it to staff in a way that they want to go jump off that bridge. I'm a little spoiled because there's a department in Cumberland County that has a director that her people will walk through fire for her. I mean, they will crawl through broken glass, and I don't know how she does it, but I think a library director is kind of, you know, in that same position.
Yeah. Well, we two things I would say about that. One is I was fascinated today when I talked with the staff in that they recognize that as well. And that they pointed out that historically the library has kind of, to a certain extent, been on its own and not quite as much as into the county culture and system. And they realize that that's a change that needs to occur for a lot of them. That obviously doesn't come without some pains, and you have to have the right person to do that. A big thing that we're very successful at is between the emotional intelligence testing and the nature of the exercises that we administer, we really know who's going to be a team leader and somebody who can get commitment and who's not. Anytime you interview a candidate, they're going to tell you they're a team leader, and then, you know, their actions often belie that. But we will know that. And my experience is that's what's required. If you're going to get that kind of commitment and get people on board and be effective at making changes, you've got to be able to hold people accountable, but at the same time, they need to be part of it. They need to be part of the process and have a stake and a say in what's going on. So I think we could be very effective at doing that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, great points. Yeah. Katrina, you were going to raise some questions too?
I was going to ask a very simple question, and I may have already missed the answer to it, but just a question about who falls into that assessor category. I was hearing that used as part of the process, and just kind of wondering, aside from your team, who's engaged in assessing as we go through this?
Well, we do not assess. Our team does not. In fact, even Susan, who I'd love to have as an assessor, by the time she's interviewed the candidates, she's contaminated at that point. We don't want her assessing candidates any further than that. Again, this is something that I still haven't talked through fully with Sally, but we typically reach out to other leading library directors across the state. Actually, let me rephrase that. I'm still sort of in my old way of thinking. We recently ran a process where we had folks from Georgia, Virginia, South Carolina, North Carolina, all assessing candidates for a particular position. And with our virtual approach, we're able to do that. We've started branching out to some of these other states, both in using assessors and also running our processes. And so we can get directors from, the way we look at it is they could be from anywhere. We generally just tend to focus more on the Southeast. We don't have a predetermined criteria about who those assessors are, other than they're in library director positions, and we want diversity among our assessors. So that's pretty much it, but there is the potential to involve other folks, community members, other members of the library. That there's a problem with that if there's any internal candidates, which I would expect to see. But there can be other members of the county organization. In Susan's process, we had, if I'm not mistaken, Susan, help me out with this, I think we had members of the, there were two different boards that you were, Chapel Hill has lots of boards involved in this library. We had from three? Yeah, we had members from 3 different boards involved in the process. Yeah. And they held our toes to the fire, I'll tell you.
Yeah. So, sorry, Steve. I guess where I was kind of going to is along the same lines as Irene's thought process and working with county government. I mean, is there consideration given to bringing in people who would be at an equivalent level to the library director, who are already engaged with our county government? Who would might also be part of that assessment process. So you're referring to like maybe other department directors and so forth. Is that right, Katrina? Yeah. We'd love to do that. That'll be up to Sally and Amy and their team, but we're totally comfortable doing that. Okay.
Yeah. And I think we've done that. If I'm not mistaken, Susan, you were an assessor for some position we had with the town. Was it Parks and Recreation Director when we ran that process? You were an assessor for that.
I've done a couple. I was on one for the police. I was on a couple for fire. So that's the great thing about Steve's process is that you don't have to be a subject matter expert in libraries or fire. It's more in leadership and sort of understanding this process.
Yeah. We definitely have that potential to do that. Again, there are always some political and organizational considerations to keep in mind, but we can do that.
You touched on something a minute ago, Steve. I was wondering how you guys are going to address the issue of, well, maybe issue might not be the right word, but how are you going to deal with internal candidates? Because I'm hoping that there will be some from the Cumberland County Library System who might apply.
Yeah. We're delighted to have internal candidates. They go through the process just like everybody else. And they get assessed objectively just like everybody else. It actually, one of the things that I really believe about our process is it's so comprehensive that, the usual interview, again, tends to, you're only getting to the surface of skills for the candidate. It tends to be done very subjectively. When you have an internal candidate, it becomes very subjective and very political. Our process is not that way. These assessors could care less whether it's an internal candidate or an external candidate or who it is. They're going to provide objective feedback. So if the candidate reaches the stage of going through an assessment center with us, they're an internal person, they would be assessed just like everybody else. And we also will provide feedback to that internal candidate, whether they get the position or not, because they've made a huge commitment. They're obviously at a pretty high standing to be considered for the director position. And we want to help them along in their professional development and so forth as well. So that's basically how we deal with an internal. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions before we ask you? We're going to drill you with some questions. Now you've drilled us. We're going to turn around and drill you with some questions. So do you have any more for us? Okay.
I do not.
Okay. Everybody good? Okay. So let me, and by the way, this is the first time Susan and I have done one of these. So Susan, I want you to jump in and ask questions and get clarification and so forth as we go. My head may be down. We were talking about hairstyles a little earlier, and I was commenting on how much I envy Belinda's hair. So you may see the top of my head a lot as I'm taking notes. I will be doing that pretty copiously as we go through this. But let me just tell you what, I want to ask you a couple of questions. One is, and this may seem a little weird to you at first, but I think you'll find that it gives you a lot of space to talk about your thinking, to share your thinking. The question I want to ask you is, what do you see as the biggest challenges facing Cumberland County Library that the next director is going to have to be dealing with? That can include anything. That can be continuing to deal with COVID as it affects us or it impacts library services. It can be technology. It can be expanding services, engaging in different ways with the community. It can be dealing with staff and morale issues or budget, whatever. Anything is fair game for you to talk about. I do push to get specifics. The example I always hear is if I ask this question, folks say, well, communication is an issue. Well, what does that mean? Is that communication with the public, inside the department? Is it interpersonal communication? Is it speaking skills? What do we mean? So I will ask you for some clarification from time to time and try to make sure that we're clear. So again, the more detail we have, the better we can serve you in this process. So I'll ask you that question. That'll be our main focus. I'm going to come back and ask you what you think the top priorities are for the next director. And if there are any competencies we haven't covered, I'd like to hear about that as well. We'll probably cover most of them through these first two questions. So, okay. So let me start off with the first question again. What do you see as the biggest challenges? Again, internal, external. Can be current challenges. It could be challenges down the road, hopefully post-COVID and so forth. So you talk and I'll take notes. And Susan, you jump in and help facilitate and ask questions. All right. What do we got?
So I'll start. So
okay.
One of the issues that I think will be very important for the library director to address is the, I guess, I don't know if you would call it public relations, but just making sure people understand the services the library has to offer, whatever they may be post-COVID or while we're still in COVID. But one of the things that I find sometimes is when I'm talking to folks in the community about the library, they don't always recognize the magnitude of services that the library offers. And there's there's a gap there between what the library offers and what the community knows that they offer. Even now with COVID, I had posted something on Facebook one time about I think just even about the curbside pickup. And some people, oh, I didn't know they were doing that. So I don't know if that's just a, you know, if that's a public relations problem or what it is, but I just feel that people really don't know the full range of services that a library offers.
Okay.
And I would say, Belinda, just to kind of tag on that, because that's exactly where I would be going to, is the director of the library in this community, I think, faces an uphill battle in public perception, and it's not just the general public, but the perception of the people who write the checks, basically. And that comes from obviously the public support, that sort of thing. So I think that's probably going to be a tremendous challenge. As Belinda indicated, it's not just the size of things, but the breadth of them, the scope of all of the services that the library provides. So I think that's going to be a huge challenge. I think going forward, funding, which ultimately comes from that public support, is going to be a significant issue. And I'll just throw out, I think still the library is obviously both physically and philosophically a huge part of our community and our downtown. I think that we still have that ongoing struggle with what right do homeless people have to space in front of or inside a building. So I think that will continue to be a challenge for whoever is the director of whether it's just that facility or the library overall. So those would be my big thoughts. Thanks for kicking it off, Belinda.
Katrina,
I'll go next.
sorry.
Okay,
Actually,
go ahead.
Katrina, can I just ask a follow-up? Because when you mentioned the people that write the checks, so what I think I heard from Belinda was a perception among the community and users or non-users that they don't understand all that a library has or does. And I just want to confirm what I think I heard from you, that's also an internal challenge as well, that other organizations or just talk a bit more about what you meant when you said the people that write the checks.
I don't think it would be unfair to say that there are county commissioners, for example, who would dispute the library's value in the context of a county budget, for example, and where funding should be allocated. And obviously I believe that, and I think this is probably a pretty common feeling among us. But I think that stems, at least in part, from a failure to understand the full breadth of services that are provided and the impact that they have on the community.
Thank you. Okay.
Sure.
I'm not as eloquent as Katrina or Belinda, but I kind of piggyback on both their points. What I was going to say is that it seems to me that since I've been on the board, that the library has to continuously prove its relevancy. And that, I mean, it kind of feels like if you're already starting from behind, if you have to prove you're relevant before somebody sees your worth, and I think that sort of goes right along with what Katrina just said, that whoever the decision makers are, kind of don't see the full worth of the library. And with that sort of drags morale down on the staff, because it's not just the 6 or 7 of us that see that. I mean, you know, everybody that works at the library is pretty much a brainiac. So they kind of see that issue, and that kind of brings morale down. So I think that goes back to what I was saying earlier, that I think the library director is walking a fine line and is often in a difficult position because county government is their boss. But at the same time, they need to kind of motivate and keep the good people that they have. So, and it all sort of goes back to, is the library relevant? How is it library relevant? And also to the point that Belinda made, that if the public doesn't know what the library does, then it's kind of, you know, you have to prove that you're relevant today. Does that make any sense at all?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You know,
I'm trying not to ramble, it's kind of hard for me.
you know,
Let me ask a quick question, if I could. How effectively does the library engage with the community? I mean, and the way I mean that is, you know, I see Susan's library all the time. It's like there's constant flow of community groups coming in and using the library and so on and so forth. So there's a very active engagement with the community, not just to come in and check out a book or, you know, use a computer, but engagement. How effective is the Cumberland County Library in terms of that kind of proactive community engagement?
I think things have gotten a lot better since public relations were sort of centralized under Sally. I think they have gotten a lot better. Could always be better. If, for example, the curbside pickup, they had curbside pickup for a couple weeks before it ever showed up on their website and you know, on the front page. And then for a couple weeks after that, the hours weren't quite right that they had listed. And that's not Sally's fault. That's, you know, whoever gave the information to Sally. So I think it could always be better. But since public relations went over to Sally's department, it has gotten a lot better.
Okay.
I think.
So you asked Steve very specifically about other community organizations utilizing the library facilities. And honestly, I wish I could speak to that a little bit better or be more informed about that. And I don't know if anybody on the call can speak to how often does a civic organization or a church group or whatever meet at a library facility, because I honestly don't know.
well, I actually think there's quite a bit of engagement because I've attended, you know, lots of activities down at the Pate Room at the headquarters. I know the other branches, you know, they have the meeting rooms, and those meeting rooms pretty much get used. There have been times when I've been in the downtown area and you can't get into the parking lot because people are going. So I know that people, those rooms are engaged quite a bit by different organizations, and the library has a very user-friendly system of signing up to use any of those meeting rooms. I mean, it's just a matter of going online and seeing what's available and doing so. So I think those get used quite a bit by multiple organizations. Like I said, I know I've been to quite a few functions, and I usually go to the headquarters because that's the one that's kind of closest to me. And again, it depends on what the program is, as far as which branch that it's held at. But I think they do a good job of that. Now, where they could do a little better, because sometimes I don't think people in maybe smaller organizations, people don't always know that these meeting rooms are available for their use or what the criteria is. I know, for example, just to give an example, our local housing association, we were looking for a place to meet, and I said, "Oh, we can book a room. We can book a meeting room in the library." And they go, "Oh, we can?" I'm like, "Yeah." So I said, "We'll just go online and do it." So I said, "All you got to do is your library card, go on and do it." And they were like, and the people in that group, didn't know that was available to them. So they said, no charge. I said, no, you're a taxpayer. As long as the room's available, you can use them.
Great, that's helpful.
Susan?
Yeah, sorry, thank you. I have a follow-up question to that. So Steve asked about community engagement, and I heard you both talk about one form of community engagement, which is through physical space, right? So your housing group meeting there, meeting in the building. Do you all have a sense of the other forms of community engagement beyond PR and meeting rooms? Like, do you have a sense of, does the library have strong foundational partnerships with the schools or the NAACP or any of the community, like other community anchors? I'm curious about that.
A booth at our foundational festivals or that kind of outreach as well. And
whether it's outreach or like actual partnerships that like lead to a project or work.
Yeah.
I do think that they do with traditional entities, like, for example, you listed the schools, like with the Board of Elections. Early voting is all over the libraries usually. I think it could be improved. For example, I think there was a couple of staff members that the last time we had a Pride Fest, which was a year and a half ago now, a couple of staff members volunteered to have a booth at the Pride Fest, and that was a really big success. So they have those foundational ties with traditional sort of entities like the schools. And I think, I don't know about the NAACP, to be honest with you, because I think that library has tried very hard to stay in sort of a neutral space. I don't know that, but that's the feeling I'm getting. So I think, I don't know. I don't know how it is with non-traditional sort of entities.
Right. I can say that through the schools, I know when COVID first hit and schools went virtual and we were doing the drive by the school to pick up the school lunches for the kids stuff, the library had the handout, and I thought it was neat because I was hearing about it at the trustees meeting that it was being put together. Like, these are resources that people can use. And then there I'm going through to pick up the lunch, and that comes in it. So I think it has been good at getting information out to people that may need it, how they can get help at those times. Sometimes I know that I think was probably a pretty effective way to do it. Also, some of the community engagement, I forget what it was called, like conversations.
Yes.
I can't remember the name of it, but the organization that they worked with for that, I can't remember what it was, but that was very interesting with people coming in from different backgrounds, just to and we would just have discussions that were well facilitated about race issues and just trying to help create those conversations. And I think that is something that I will say I'm proud of our library for being a place to host those types of things that are very needed right now.
Good. Okay. Any other key challenges?
So I would challenge Dennis, I think, maybe a little bit to talk about this in more detail. But another key strategic relationship for the library director here is going to be with the Friends of the Library. Okay. So that supportive arm, so much a part of not just activities, but funding for those activities, that sort of thing. So Dennis, I don't know if you're in a position to talk about that a little more. And Susan and Steve, I'm challenging Dennis with it because he's been a very active and engaged member of the Friends Board prior to coming on the Board of Trustees. So, and Anne, I know you've been engaged with the Friends as well a little bit more. So just thought I'd throw that one out there.
Yeah, sure. And Katrina, I appreciate you allowing me and pointing that out. I was fortunate enough to spend a little over 6+ years as the treasurer of the Friends of the Library, so I'm very familiar with their funding. Some of the local groups that provide incoming funds, receipts. Of course, our biggest revenue has always been the book sales due to COVID-19. However, things changed over the last 9 or 10 months. But ultimately, there's a lot of activities for adults, for children, programs that are run throughout the year that are funded through those book sales revenues, as well as outside sources, the Cumberland Community Foundation. There's several named grants, restricted funds that are either designated for adult type programs or possibly the children, youth programs. But that being said, I think that's always been a critical arm in the whole process of allowing for staff development at the library, programs where they can be educated, trained in particular areas where they want to grow as individuals. I think ultimately that role has been one that's been an ongoing relationship, and the executive director also attends and is very active in those meetings with the Friends of the Library. And I know just in past meetings that I had attended, there will be ideas or certain things that might be additional equipment that's needed, items that may not have been in the original county budget for the library, but certainly come up, peripheral items, monitors, things that are used at the checkout desks. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that function, that the Friends of the Library is very important. So I would think that whomever is brought in would have the ability, to work as a liaison and be able to create that sense of relationship between the support that the Friends provides for the library. And there was one other comment that I heard earlier that I wanted to touch on, and that is the budget. I think the overall budget obviously is very dependent on, the county commissioners. There's a review process, but a lot of the items, are kind of have been hands off. And by that, I mean the salaried positions, positions that are full-time. A number of years ago, there was a budget cut that resulted in most of the part-time positions being eliminated. So this person as executive director has to have a good understanding of, what the funding is all about, what things are coming up. Coming out of this COVID-19, obviously a lot of funds have been spent for things other than were initially intended. And, there's an element, I think, in this position, and I'm, maybe getting ahead of this process, but there has to be a certain element of salesmanship, statesperson ability. The person has to be able, and I think we've touched on that, be able to sell the library, its functions, its visibility in the community. And I really believe that it takes a well-rounded person. And I would think that, based on what Susan shared with her 7 years as being the ED in Chapel Hill, I think you had about 18 prior years also associated with the library or functions therein. We really want someone with experience, someone that has, multiple years, 5, 10, whatever that number is. I don't know. There's a magic number, I'm sure. But, the ability to be an effective administrator and a supervisor and So I think it requires a very well-rounded individual. It also sounds like in this process, that will come to fruition.
Dennis, I'm going to ask you one quick clarifying question, and I'll also share that my prior position was as a marketing director, so for a public library, so I understand the need for that salesmanship and statesmanship and PR. But I just want to make sure that I was hearing you correctly. The next director is inheriting a strong, positive, collegial working relationship with the Friends, or would you describe it as challenging? I think I heard that it's fairly positive, but I want to make sure.
I would say it's very positive. At least it's been that way during the time that I was served.
And do you all have a foundation group as well?
The Cumberland Community Foundation.
Okay, so not a library foundation.
Yeah, there is. There's actually two, a library endowment trust and a library endowment fund that are managed through Cumberland Community Foundation.
Gotcha.
So here, Susan, I don't know if it matters, but Cumberland Community Foundation is kind of a clearinghouse for a lot of funding for different organizations and efforts. I brought Friends just because that's a key strategic relationship, and I've always had the sense that the previous occupant of the space, the chair, has had a great working relationship. So I think that somebody coming in really has the advantage of that. It's the expectation that it's going to be a good relationship.
Great. Thank you.
Any other challenges that folks would like to talk about? Not that that's not enough, but still.
Oh, us? No, I'm just kidding. We're good boys.
One thing I just want to mention, I think it had something to do with something Katrina had said, is really, it's that the public perception of the library, but not just by our general community members. I mean, sometimes there are elected officials who forget that in this community, there is a gap between the haves and the have-nots, and it's a wide gap. And there have been folks who have felt that as long as you have a smartphone, why would you need a library? Because you have all the information at hand. That doesn't represent everybody in our community. So it's, again, how do you combat people? How do you work with people who are not recognizing the value of a library, who also have a lot of power in the community, who already have an audience? People are going to listen to them. And it's like there's a segment of our population that who are being ignored because someone, people aren't recognizing their privilege. People aren't recognizing their privilege, and not everyone, and that goes back to, at the headquarters library, what do you do with the people that are homeless? Services like this happen. But there are folks in the community who, gripe about that particular branch because it is downtown, which is the branch I frequent most of the time. And to me, it's not an issue. But again, that's an ongoing issue that the director does have to answer to quite a few times. There was a situation over the last year prior to COVID where there was a family that was like camping out in their vehicle, but where they were camping out wasn't library property because it was on the city street, and folks were, haranguing the library. What are you going to do about these people? What are you going to do about these people? And it really wasn't in the library's hand. It was a city decision. It was a county decision. They had to take care of it. So there are certain things that just keep coming up. And so much of it is, you know, for folks who, like I said, who have access to unlimited internet and technology and what have you, not recognizing how important those services are to people who don't have that. And that's a large part of our community.
So Belinda, and just kind of along those lines, do you think it would be fair to say there's another potential pitfall kind of thing in that while it's a county library system, its largest facility sits inside the city limits? And we have two very different governments. The county allocating all the funding for the library, but the city managing the physical location of that largest branch. So just, again, another place where conflicts could arise, I think. And I think it's probably fair to say that in the past, the director has really relied on the county, and Sally may be able to speak to that, but where had to rely on the county to manage that relationship with the city sort of thing, rather than the director doing that individually.
Okay. Sally, did you want to say anything about that? Right.
And what'd you do with Sally?
She stepped out so that I could take my mask off.
Oh, okay. That was nice of her.
You know, Fayetteville is if you look at the numbers, Fayetteville and Cumberland County is a relatively small county and a relatively small city.
Hey.
Population and area and all that. But we have all of the same issues and disparities of New York City or Chicago or Detroit, because we are just that diverse. You know, you have the family that's living in the parking lot across the street from the, you know, from headquarters. But in the same area that of service of that library, we also have some of the wealthiest people in this town. You know, have libraries out in the what they call across the river, which I still quite haven't figured out, where the population is maybe a bit older and extremely conservative. You know, on the other hand, we have other branches that are sitting in areas where, you know, if you let them, people would be swinging from the chandeliers all day, because they're, you know, they're younger and more progressive and a little bit off the rocker, and you know, so we have all of that. Yes, Katrina, I count myself as one of those off the rocker kind of people.
Hey, I want to know which branch she goes to. I don't.
All of them. How about the county? But I think I think that's going to be an issue that you know, the library director has to be able to talk to all these people with equal sort of competence and empathy and competence.
Right.
Hey, this is Sally, and I'm back near a microphone. So I to Katrina's a point about intergovernmental relations, because our libraries, we have many in the city of Fayetteville, we have in the town of Oak Mills, and then in the other Spring Lake, another town of Spring Lake. And then we have those that serve Stedman, Wade, Godwin, Falcon, and then the unincorporated areas. So we do work the county intergovernmentally, and I know that the library staff and those branch managers reach out to those governmental bodies A good example was the census and the efforts that the library made early on. Of course, COVID really hampered all of those efforts, but the library had a great plan on outreach for the census and reached out to all 9 municipalities and to work with them. And so I just wanted to add that.
That was a great example, the census. That was a really great example.
Good. Okay. Any other key challenges that anybody wants to bring up? So, so far, if we had to name the top priorities, obviously, because we've been talking about this outreach and educating the community and engaging with the community, that's obviously one of them. Any others that you would put in the top 2 or 3 challenges?
The elephant in the room, staff morale.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Oh, see, I would have thought the elephant in the room would be the size of a paycheck. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I don't draw a paycheck from the library. So
Nor do I, but
I'm kind of curious about that identification as a major problem, because I think some of the challenges we're seeing now are because of things during COVID. But I'm just curious about why you feel that's an elephant in the room.
I don't know. I do know that staff morale has, of course, dipped with COVID. I mean, there's no question about it. I'm wondering if
my
staff
morale's dipped. I don't know.
I don't know if the dip is if COVID was the cause or if COVID uncovered poor staff morale. You know, I have, and this is anecdotal information because I don't have any stats to back this up with, but I have heard of a lot of people that have left the library, the Cumberland County Library, and moved to other library systems. So I guess it might be worth finding out why that was happening or why that happened, and if my sort of anecdotal feeling is actually what happened, or have I just heard about 3 to 5 people that have left, and I'm kind of projecting that to the larger system. But I think staff morale in any organization, even if it's good, needs to be a top priority, because if it's good, you need to keep it good, and if it's bad, you need to improve it. So I think it needs to be a priority regardless of whether it's good or bad.
So Sally, I would just say not necessarily for discussion during this process, but I'd be kind of curious now that Irene's broached the subject about whether departures are any different in terms of percentages, anything like that, in the library system than any place else in the county, but that can be for later on. So,
Katrina, I could reach out to the interim HR director tomorrow and have them run those numbers and provide those to Steve and to the trustees to follow up, since you brought up that question, and then we'll have that.
Cool.
thank you, Sally.
Thank you. Yeah, I would be curious about that, because pre-COVID, I spent a lot of time at the East Regional Library. I was there weekly volunteering with the program, and so I didn't see that.
Yeah.
So I don't. So is it branch specific? Is it system wide? What is it? I don't know, because that's not something that I saw.
Yeah. I have to say they're all fantastic. And I have, when there ever was a problem, I never saw it in public. I never saw poor staff morale sort of affect how staff dealt with customers. But then sometimes you see it, you know, they're friendly and they're out, you know, they give you everything you need and they're upbeat. And then somebody will turn around and walk off and it's a completely different, you know, it's like, okay, now I can take my public face off. And it's kind of, you know, so again, I might be off my rocker, but either way, I still think that whether morale is good or bad, it needs to be a priority.
So I'm kind of curious, Steve and Susan, is there some challenge that we're just missing, where maybe we're not close enough to being a library director? Something else that we ought to just have a conversation about? Just
Wow, what a great question. Susan, do you have any thoughts about that?
Gosh, so I will say, just to again speak to a couple things I've heard, the morale question is one that we can, as you mentioned, Sally can provide some information, whether it's exit interviews or some stats and things to Steve and I. But I will say that when I did this process, there were morale issues at Chapel Hill, and that was one of the assessment center exercises. And it was designed in a way that there were, and these aren't overdone. They aren't, you know, sort of, you know, trying to get you kind of things. But I had a group of assessors playing a very downtrodden staff. And so just, again, adding that as we hear these priorities and these challenges, this all goes into the process. And this might come out in the interviews that I do or in the actual exercises. As far as,
oh, go ahead.
As far as sort of what else should we be thinking about, you know, I think moving through COVID is huge. And so that goes into everything from change management to innovation to really articulating value and that resource allocation. Speaking for myself, I will say that in Chapel Hill, and I would say most public libraries that are thriving and surviving right now, it's collaboration, whether it's with other county departments, other community agencies, public-private partnerships. So I think that if there were a big buzzword for public library leadership, I would say that collaboration, whether it's for moving through COVID or, you know, advancing county goals or civic goals, I would say collaborative leadership is a real key for the next, or for the future. I'm not sure if that answered your question, Katrina.
It did in large part, and I appreciate that. I've just been sitting here thinking, oh my gosh, just all of the things that we've been talking about. Would I want to be interviewing for this position at this point? Because the library that is, as it's functioning today, is nothing like the library that we remember from a year ago, for example. So just such a coming into, ultimately we could hope, an unrealistic environment. It just could be a totally different kind of person to manage this as opposed to managing the library in happier times. So I thought those were good points. Thanks, Susan, for managing through COVID.
Yeah.
And one thing in particular I'm thinking about, because I was looking at a pile of books I had. You know, the Friends of the Library did those book sales that were a significant fundraisers for programming. So that's gone. That's probably, that may not be ever coming back. How do you make up that lost revenue? What happens there? Because that paid for, you know, sometimes for equipment, paid for a lot of teen programming, young adult programming. That money's gone.
Oh, I hope not. We still have lots of books down there.
And that's so funny. And I'm sitting here thinking, and the next challenge would be, and what do we do with all of those books?
Because right now, coronavirus is deciding whether or not we're ever going to be able to do that again.
And I will tell you, if anyone from the Friends is interested, our Friends group has pivoted and set up a fully online bookstore. So if anyone is interested, I would be happy to connect you.
Yeah. So remember, Brian did a lot of that after our library got flooded. So yeah. So we have at least a few people on the Friends with some experience at that, but we'll mention it to them.
Okay. Is there anything else anybody has to add at this point? This has been a great discussion. The key area that I just want to check in with you all about, but again, feel free to add anything that you feel like we haven't covered, but we've talked about some key competencies, being a change manager, being a salesperson, being a team leader, having demonstrated administrative skills. Any other key competencies, any key challenges, anything that that you want to make sure that we hear that you haven't shared at this point?
Well, I admire your ability to turn everything we just blurted out in an hour into proper business lingo.
Well, thank you.
Did I, speaking of putting it in the business lingo, did I hear somewhere in there something that reflected a drive toward innovation and sort of outside the box thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Again, going back to the scope of what a library can be, one, and the tools that are out there to allow it to be those things and so much more.
Good. Okay, great. Anything else we're missing?
I don't know. Anne's probably got to have something hiding behind that mask.
And I think Anne is the only one of us that has school-age children. I think the rest of us are over that sort of age hump.
But I visit a lot with my young friends before COVID, so we were there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
We were there all the time. So one of the things, in going along with what Katrina said about innovation and stuff, because we know when we get through COVID or get by, what have you, we're really going to have to look at how we deliver library services. What worked during COVID, what didn't work, a lot didn't work because so much of what the library does is public facing. People are in spaces together. So what worked that was moved to online. Is that something that we might want to scale up because it did do well? What does that mean to scale it up? Does that mean that library staff would need additional training on some types of technology or skill development or what have you in order to do that? Because not as bad as it is, as horrible as it is, there are some things that may be working well. Are people identifying that, okay, this going forward, this is the piece that we need to be able to do. So the new library director, and I guess that might come out in conversation with other library directors to also see what they're doing, and being really in tune with what your professional association is doing and what the best practices are, and how do you bring that into your community, and make it adaptable and flexible to your community.
That's a great point. I know for our business, and I'm sure for library business as well, that there's certain things we've learned to do, had to learn to do during COVID that have post-COVID will make us more effective. And I'm sure that's the case for the library too. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know how big a challenge is it. And somebody who's been around at least as long as I've been in this town may have something else to say about it. But I feel like I've lived here for almost 40 years, no, probably more than 40 years. And I can only remember 2 library directors.
Wow.
Wow.
Jerry
Yeah.
Thrasher. Yeah.
Yeah. Jerry and Jody. I mean, those, and I don't need to go research it, I guess, to find out how long, but both of them had significant tenure here that, again, I think can be a challenge to somebody new coming in. So.
Interesting.
Good point.
Don't hold us to that you'll get another director for 20 something years.
No, I don't hold you to that at all. It's got pros and cons. So
yeah, true, it does.
But as I'm thinking about challenges, I'm like, oh, that's a potential to because that changes expectation and how big the shoes to fill might be, sort of thing. So.
Yeah.
My predecessor had been here, I think it was 28 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is definitely a challenge. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, you all have been wonderful to talk with. This has been fascinating. And I love the way that we've talked through all this and that you all seem to know one another so well and can draw on each other's strengths. That's great. Susan, do you have any more questions for the board?
I don't think so. This has been a good conversation.
Yeah. So thank you all so much. We are on this. Tomorrow we'll start working on the job ad and get things moving. We'll do our darndest. Again, can't promise 20 years, but we'll do our darndest to find a candidate who's really got the skills, particularly to help to move the library forward. We'll make every effort to make sure that we're getting diverse candidates as part of that pool. And I always call recruiting is kind of like fishing. You can have all the right equipment, use all the right methods, and they just may not be biting on a particular day. And then another day they're biting like crazy. So, but we'll do everything we can.
Well, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to participate in this. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like we've actually gotten to know each other a little bit better this evening too. So thanks for that.
Good.
Yep.
Good.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate it all. And I think it's a great start here.
And this is the second time that Dennis has spoken today.
I've listened intently, and I too have learned a lot in the process.
Oh, good. It's great.
Good night, Dennis.
Okay. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.